The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and crushed pine, a scent so deeply ingrained in her that she considered it the smell of her own soul. For Celine, princess of the Silver Moon Pack, this was freedom. The snap of a twig under her paw, the whisper of wind through ancient firs, the low thrum of her pack's heart beating somewhere in the distance. It was all part of a song she had known since birth. Tonight, the moon was a sliver, a claw mark in the velvet sky, and the air was thick with the coming rain. It was on this night, a night like any other, that her world was stolen from her. The attack was unnervingly silent. Not the crash and roar of a rival pack, but a cold, predatory stillness that descended upon the clearing where she ran in her wolf form. One moment, she was chasing the scent of a snow hare. The next, the air turned to ice. A presence, ancient and utterly alien, wrapped around her senses. It was a void where life should have been, a chilling emptiness that spoke of stone and dust and endless, starless nights. Her wolf's hackles rose, a low growl vibrating in her chest. She spun, teeth bared, amber eyes scanning the oppressive dark. They moved like shadows detaching from deeper shadows. 3 figures, impossibly fast. Vampires. Their scent was cloying, a mix of cold stone, dried blood, and something unnervingly sweet, like dying roses. Her pack stories painted them as soulless monsters, creatures of pure malice who preyed on the warm-blooded with a detached cruelty. She had always believed the tales. Now, facing them, she felt the truth of it deep in her bones. She lunged, a blur of silver fur and snapping jaws, aiming for the throat of the closest one. Her teeth, which could crush bone, met only air as the vampire sidestepped with liquid grace. Another was behind her, his touch a brand of ice against her flank. A paralyzing cold spread through her muscles, a venomous magic that fought the wild heat of her blood. The frost touch was ancient vampire craft, requiring direct contact and intense concentration, a capture tool reserved for the most important of prey. She snarled, twisting, but her limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The third figure stood apart, watching. He was taller than the others, his stillness possessing a weight of authority that marked him as their leader. Even in the gloom, she could feel the intensity of his gaze. The fight was brutal and blessedly short. She was strong, a princess of an alpha line, but she was 1 against 3, and their unnatural speed and strength were overwhelming. The cold spread, locking her joints, stealing her breath. Her powerful form faltered, her legs buckling. As she collapsed onto the forest floor, the world tilting, her last act of defiance was to shift back. If she was to be taken, it would be as Celine, not as a beast to be caged. She refused to be treated like an animal, to be dehumanized by her captors. The transformation was a wrenching agony in her weakened state, bones snapping and reforming. She lay naked and trembling on the cold earth, glaring up at her captors with all the hatred she possessed. The leader finally moved, stepping into the faint moonlight. He was dressed in black, his clothing severe and elegant, his face a mask of aristocratic calm. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, and his eyes were the deep, starless violet of a midnight sky, holding centuries of secrets and sorrow. He was beautiful, in the way a perfectly crafted weapon is beautiful, deadly and cold. This was Adrian, the Vampire King. She knew it instinctively. The monster from the stories, the architect of her people's suffering. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. One of his guards moved to throw a cloak over her, but Adrian raised a hand, a subtle gesture that stopped the man instantly. He knelt, moving with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The cold radiating from him was a physical presence. He held her gaze, his violet eyes searching hers. She expected to see triumph, malice, cruelty. Instead, she saw something that looked unnervingly like regret. It was a flicker, a shadow in those ancient depths, but it was there. It only fueled her rage. She would not be pitied by her captor. "Princess Selene," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. It was like the toll of a distant bell, mournful and commanding. "You will come with me." It was not a request. He extended a hand, pale and elegant. She spat at it. The glob of saliva sizzled for a moment on his leather glove. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The guard behind him hissed, a sound of pure fury, but Adrian remained perfectly still. He simply retracted his hand and rose to his full height, towering over her. "So be it," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He gestured to his men. They wrapped her in a heavy cloak, the fabric cold against her skin, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The world spun, the familiar scent of pine and rain replaced by the dead, cold smell of her enemies. As they spirited her away into the night, moving at a speed that blurred the ancient trees into streaks of gray and green, Selene's last coherent thought was a vow. He would break before she did. She would burn his entire kingdom to the ground with the force of her hatred. The Vampire King had taken her, but he would never, ever have her. He had just made the gravest mistake of his unnaturally long life. The journey to his castle was a disorienting blur of speed and chilling silence. She was held securely, her struggles useless against the unyielding strength of her captors. The cold that had seeped into her bones from their touch was more than physical. It was a spiritual frost, a deep-seated wrongness that her wolf spirit recoiled from. The frost poison lingered in her blood, a creeping numbness that smothered her connection to her wolf, leaving her feeling hollow and incomplete. When they finally stopped, the air had changed. The rich, living scent of the forest was gone, replaced by the smell of wet stone, high mountain air, and something ancient, like dust and time itself. They were at his fortress, the heart of the vampire kingdom, a place spoken of in her pack's legends as the Black Citadel, a wound of rock and shadow carved into the very peak of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. She was carried through immense gates that groaned like dying giants, into a courtyard silent as a tomb. The castle was a Gothic monstrosity of soaring towers and jagged battlements that clawed at the bruised pre-dawn sky. It was a place built to intimidate, to declare power and permanence. It was a prison made of stone and dread. Inside, the halls were vast and cold, the only sound the faint echo of their footsteps on the polished marble floors. Torches burned in sconces, their flames casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. Portraits of long-dead vampires watched her passage with pale, disapproving eyes. Every inch of the place screamed of death and dominion. She was taken up a winding staircase, the air growing colder with every step, until they reached a heavy oak door bound in iron. Adrian dismissed his guards with a nod, their shadowy forms melting back down the corridor without a sound. For the first time, she was truly alone with him. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. She remained, stubbornly, defiantly, still. A muscle flickered in his jaw. With a sigh that sounded impossibly weary for a creature of his power, he reached out, his touch shockingly gentle as he guided her over the threshold. The moment his fingers brushed her arm, she flinched away as if burned, stumbling into the room. He did not follow. He stood in the doorway, a tall, dark silhouette against the flickering torchlight of the hall. "This will be your room," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "You will be safe here. You will be given food, water, clothing. You will not be harmed." Selene laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Safe? You speak of safety after you ripped me from my home? You speak of harm as if this—" She gestured around the opulent but barren room, is not harm in itself? His violet eyes held that same flicker of something she could not name. The war between our people has escalated. Your father, the Alpha King, has refused all attempts at negotiation. For 50 years I have sent envoys with copies of the ancient treaty, proof that the sunken valley was ceded to my people by your own ancestors. He has burned every document, called our archivists liars, and refused to allow his historians to view the original in our archives. He calls it a trap, a vampire trick. He encroaches on lands that have been ours for a millennium, lands we need to survive. I required leverage. But more than that, I needed someone from your bloodline, someone who knows your histories and your legendary ancestors, to see the truth with wolf eyes and bear witness to her people. Leverage, she spat the word. I am not a chess piece, you bloodless monster. I am the daughter of the moon, and my pack will tear this castle down stone by stone to find me. They will rip out your cold, dead heart. They are welcome to try, he said, and for the first time, a hint of the ancient, formidable power he held bled into his voice. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This castle was built on a convergence of ley lines, a place where magic dies. Your pack bond cannot reach through these walls. You are alone here, cut off from everything you know. But I have done what I believe is necessary to protect my people. I chose you specifically, Princess. My intelligence reports said you were the one among your father's children who argued for peace councils, who questioned the necessity of this war. I thought, I hoped, you might be the one who could see reason. I take no pleasure in this. Your pleasure means nothing to me, she snarled, wrapping the cloak tighter around herself. Leave me. He held her gaze for a long moment, an eternity stretching between them in the silent room. Then he gave a slight, formal bow. As you wish. He pulled the heavy door shut. The sound of a key turning in the lock was a deafening finality. The shriek of metal on metal echoing the scream trapped in her own throat. She was a captive, a prisoner in the heart of her enemy's den. Every night she had reached out with her mind, searching for Kale's familiar presence, her father's steady strength. But there was only silence, an unnatural void where the pack song should have been. The castle swallowed even the moon's whisper. She sank to the floor, the cold stone seeping through the cloak, and finally let the trembling consume her. But she did not cry. Her grief was too hot, too sharp for tears. It was a rage that promised to burn. He thought he had caged a wolf. He was wrong. He had caged a wildfire. The first night, desperate and furious, she had tried to shift. The moment her bones began to crack and reform, searing pain had lanced through her from the walls themselves. Silver, woven into the very mortar, inlaid in the bars of the window. She'd collapsed, retching, her body forced back to human form, the agony leaving her gasping and weak. The frost poison still in her blood made it worse, the two forces, vampire magic and wolfbane metal, crushing her spirit between them. She didn't try again. The first days of her captivity stretched into an eternity of silence and stone. The tower room was her world, a gilded cage with a view of nothing but a sheer drop of black rock and a perpetually overcast sky. It was large and furnished with a Spartan elegance, a heavy dark wood bed, a wardrobe, a small table and 2 chairs. Everything was cold to the touch. The stone floors, the iron fittings, even the silk sheets on the bed felt as if they held a permanent, unyielding chill. A small barred window was set high in the wall, too. High to see anything but clouds. a constant, taunting reminder of the freedom she had lost. Time was marked only by the arrival of food, left on a tray outside her door by a silent servant she never saw. The lock would scrape, the tray would appear, the lock would scrape again. It was the rhythm of her imprisonment. Celine spent those first days in a state of coiled fury. She paced the room like the caged animal she was, the phantom sensation of her paws on soft earth a constant torment. Her wolf spirit, so intrinsically linked to her human self, was agitated and restless, clawing at the confines of her mind, desperate for the moon, for the hunt, for the familiar scent of her pack. The silence of the castle was a heavy blanket, suffocating the vibrant life she was used to. Here there was no birdsong, no rustle of leaves, only the distant, mournful sigh of the wind whistling through the castle's crenellations. It was a dead place, and she feared its deadness would seep into her, extinguishing the fire of her spirit. She refused to eat the food they brought her. It was a small rebellion, a pathetic one, but it was all she had. The rich meats, the dark breads, the goblets of deep red wine, they remained untouched, a silent testament to her defiance. Let him see her waste away. Let him know he could cage her body, but not her will. On the third day, Adrian came to her again. The sound of the key in the lock was different this time, less perfunctory. When the door opened, he was standing there, holding the untouched tray from that morning. His expression was as impassive as ever, but she saw the slight tightening of his lips as he looked from the food to her. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, her face a mask of contempt. "You are not eating," he stated, his voice calm. "I don't dine with monsters," she retorted, her voice raw from disuse. He placed the tray on the table and regarded her with those unnervingly ancient eyes. "You will starve. That serves neither of us. My fate is of no concern to you. You wanted leverage. A corpse is leverage of a kind, is it not?" A flicker of something, anger perhaps, or frustration, crossed his face before being suppressed. "I did not bring you here to die, Celine." The use of her name, so intimate and casual from his lips, was like a slap. "You have no right to speak my name," she hissed. He inclined his head, a gesture of concession that surprised her. "Princess," he corrected himself smoothly. "Your continued health is a condition of your value. Your father will not negotiate for a daughter you have allowed to perish. From a purely strategic standpoint, you must eat." She stared at him, at the cold logic that governed his every word, and felt a fresh wave of hatred. He saw her as nothing more than an asset, a thing to be managed and maintained. "Then your strategy is flawed, because I will die before I accept anything from your blood-stained hands." He was silent for a long moment, studying her. She felt like an insect under his gaze, pinned and analyzed. She braced herself for anger, for a command, for the force she was sure he would use. Instead, he did something entirely unexpected. He pulled out one of the heavy chairs from the table, sat down, and began to speak. "The lands your father claims, the Sunken Valley, have belonged to my people since before the first wolves learned to walk on two legs," he said, his voice even and measured, as if he were delivering a history lecture. "It contains the entrances to the silent deeps, the caverns where my people hibernate during the great slumber, a cycle that comes every 5 centuries. To lose that valley would be to condemn us to extinction. We cannot surrender it. 2 millennia ago, my ancestor King Theron and your ancestor Alpha Lyra signed a treaty ceding the valley to us in perpetuity. In exchange, we swore to protect your northern territories and share the valley's medicinal herbs. Your father has seen this treaty. I have sent him perfect copies, signed and witnessed by names he must know from his own legends. He burns them. He calls them forgeries, vampire lies. He refuses to send historians to verify the original because he claims it is a trap to murder his scholars." Celine stared at him, momentarily thrown off balance. She had expected threats, not a justification. not accusations against her father. Lies, she spat, recovering her anger. It is wolf territory. Our ancestors hunted there for generations. You vampires covet it because you are greedy, because you cannot stand for any living thing to prosper. My father is a righteous king who would not burn proof of peace. You twist the truth. Is that the story your pack tells? He asked, a genuine curiosity in his tone. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me your version. Show me where my understanding is flawed. She was so taken aback by the invitation that she couldn't speak for a moment. He was her captor, the embodiment of everything she despised. He was not supposed to ask for her perspective. He was supposed to dictate, to command, to gloat. This was a tactic. It had to be. A way to get under her skin, to trick her into compliance. I have nothing to say to you, she said, turning her back on him and staring at the blank stone wall. She heard the scrape of his chair as he stood. Very well, he said, his voice once again cool and distant. But the food will continue to be provided. The choice to live is yours. He walked to the door, his footsteps silent on the stone. Before he left, he paused. The cook prepared the venison in the style of the northern wolf packs, with juniper and rowan berries. He was told it was a favorite of yours. I had my people learn everything about you before I took you, princess. Your preferences, your habits, your arguments in your father's council for peace. I chose you because I believed you, of all your siblings, might be able to see past the lies both our peoples have told. The key turned in the lock, and he was gone. Celine stood frozen, her back to the door. Her stomach clenched with a hunger so fierce it was painful. Juniper and rowan berries. How could he possibly know that? The detail was so specific, so personal, it felt like a violation. He was not just holding her captive, he was studying her, learning her, manipulating her. The thought was more chilling than any threat. She slowly turned and looked at the tray on the table. The smell of the roasted venison, a scent that reminded her of home, of feasts with her family, filled the small room. Her resolve wavered. He was playing a game, a cruel, manipulative game. And yet, the hunger was a primal, undeniable force. With a curse that was half sob, she stormed to the table, grabbed a piece of bread, and tore into it with a desperate, savage anger. He had won this small battle. But the war, she vowed, the war was far from over. She ate, fueling the fire of her hatred, preparing for the long fight ahead. A week bled into 2, each day a mirror of the last. The silent delivery of food, the unyielding stone walls, the oppressive quiet of the castle. Celine had begun eating, a concession to survival that tasted like ash in her mouth. She needed her strength. A weakened wolf could not fight, could not escape. And she would escape. The thought was a steady flame in the cold prison of her reality. She spent her hours exploring every inch of her room, testing the bars on the window, examining the mortar between the stones, searching for any weakness, any flaw in her cage. She found none. The silver burned her fingers when she touched it too long. The castle had been built to withstand armies. It would not be defeated by one captive princess. Her only point of contact with this dead world remained Adrian. He came every evening, just as dusk bled across the sky outside her high window. He never brought guards. He would enter, close the door, though she noticed he no longer locked it from the outside while he was with her, and take the seat opposite hers at the small table. At first, she met his visits with a wall of hostile silence, refusing to look at him, refusing to acknowledge his presence. She would sit on her bed, her back to him, and stare at the wall until he left. He never forced her to speak. He would simply sit in the chair for a time, a silent, brooding presence in her room, and then he would leave as quietly as he had come. It was maddening. His patience felt more like a weapon than his anger ever could. It was a slow, steady erosion of her defenses. The silence in the room was not empty. It was filled with unspoken questions, with the vast, yawning chasm of history and hatred that separated their two peoples. One evening, unable to bear the weight of it any longer, she broke. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, whirling around to face him. He looked up, his violet eyes calm, unsurprised by her outburst. "Why do you come here every night? To gloat? To watch your prize wither in her cage?" "I come here," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "to understand." "Understand what?" she scoffed. "There is nothing to understand. Your kind are parasites. You feed on the living, you steal our lands, you exist only to cause pain and death. You are a blight upon the world." The words were the catechism of her people, repeated around campfires and in war councils since she was a pup. Adrian did not react with anger. He simply inclined his head. "That is the perception of your people, yes. And from your perspective, I can see how you would believe it to be true. My people, in turn, believe the wolf shifters to be violent, expansionist, and unpredictable. Creatures of base instinct who cannot be reasoned with, only contained." "We are not animals," she flared. "We have a culture, a history, laws." "I am aware," he said, "just as we are not merely parasites. We are a civilization with our own culture, our own history, our own laws. We do not feed on the living, as you so crudely put it. The blood we consume is from willing donors within our own populace, or from livestock bred for the purpose. The killing of sentient beings for sustenance has been forbidden by our highest law for over 2,000 years. Celine stared at him, speechless. Everything she had ever been taught, every story that had fueled her hatred, claimed that vampires hunted and killed for sport and survival. "You lie." The words were automatic, a reflexive defense of her entire worldview. "Why would I lie to you?" he asked, a genuine question in his voice. "You are my prisoner. I have no need to win your approval. I am telling you the truth because I am tired of fighting shadows and stories. I want you to understand who we really are, not the monsters from your campfire tales." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. His fingers were long and pale, elegant and unnervingly still. "Tell me of your laws. You say you are not animals. Prove it. Tell me of the bond between an alpha and his pack. I have read of it, but our texts are clinical, academic. They speak of dominance and instinct. I suspect they are incomplete." His request was so unexpected, so contrary to his role as her monstrous captor, that she found herself answering before she could stop herself. The words tumbled out, first defensively, then with a growing passion she couldn't suppress. She spoke of the pack as a family, a single organism connected by loyalty and love, not just dominance. She described the role of the alpha not as a tyrant, but as a protector, a father who would die for his children. She spoke of the moon, of its sacred pull on their spirits, of the wild, joyous freedom of the hunt. She spoke of her world, a world of vibrant life, of warm blood and beating hearts, a world so completely opposite to the cold stone silence of his. He listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't challenge her. He simply listened, his gaze fixed on her, his expression rapt. For the first time, she felt truly seen by him, not as a princess, not as a political pawn, but as a person. The realization was terrifying. When she finally fell silent, her throat hoarse, the room was thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the sharp edge of hostility anymore. It was something softer, more complex. "Incomplete," he murmured, his voice low. "Yes, our texts were woefully incomplete." He stood, and the spell was broken. He was the king again, the captor. "Thank you, princess," he said, the formality a sudden jarring return to their reality. "You have illuminated a great deal. He walked to the door. "Wait," she said, the word escaping her against her will. He paused, his hand on the latch, and looked back at her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why ask me this?" He was silent for a long moment, the shadows in the room seeming to deepen around him. "Because for centuries we have fought a war against a story," he said finally, "and I am beginning to believe we have been fighting the wrong enemy." He left, closing the door softly behind him. This time, she did not hear the sound of a key in the lock. She rushed to the door, her heart pounding, and turned the handle. It was unlocked. The door swung open to a long, empty, torchlit corridor. She was free to leave the room. But where would she go? Into the heart of the monster's castle? The ley line magic that blocked her pack bond would not guide her, and silver lined the walls of this tower. Even if she made it to the courtyard, she was deep in vampire territory, surrounded by enemies. He had not freed her. He had simply lengthened her chain, expanded her cage. And in doing so, he had handed her a choice. It was a gesture of trust so profound, so utterly at odds with their situation, that it shook her to her very core. She stood in the open doorway, staring into the shadows, more a prisoner now than she had been when the door was barred. A prisoner of a question she couldn't answer. Who was this man, this monster who listened, who understood, who had just handed her a key made of trust? The unlocked door changed everything. It was a silent, constant presence in her mind, a symbol of a choice she was not yet ready to make. For 3 days, she did not cross the threshold. She stayed within the familiar confines of her room, the open doorway a gaping mouth of possibility and terror. To step out would be to accept a change in their dynamic, to move from captive to… what? A guest? The idea was absurd. Yet to stay inside felt like a different kind of surrender, a refusal to acknowledge the power he had handed her. The castle remained silent around her. No guards appeared in the hallway. No one came to force her one way or another. The choice was entirely her own. During his evening visits, the nature of their conversations shifted. The raw hostility had been replaced by a tentative, fragile curiosity. He asked her more about her world, and she, in turn, found herself asking about his. She learned that vampires were not immortal in the way her people believed. They could be killed, and they aged, albeit with excruciating slowness. A vampire of 500 years was considered young, barely an adult. Adrian, she learned, was nearly 3,000 years old. He had seen empires rise and fall, had watched the very mountains change their shape over time. This immense weight of years explained the deep, ancient sorrow she sometimes saw in his eyes. She learned of their art, their philosophy, their deep reverence for history and knowledge. His castle wasn't just a fortress. It was a library, a museum containing the collected knowledge of millennia. He spoke of stars and tides, of forgotten languages and the subtle magic that wove through the world. He spoke with a quiet passion that was utterly captivating. She found herself listening, drawn into the tapestry of his long, lonely existence. With each conversation, the image of the bloodthirsty monster from her childhood stories chipped away, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous: a man. A king burdened by duty, haunted by his past, and possessed of a keen, searching intellect. It was during these conversations that she began to feel the first, terrifying stirrings of attraction. It was something she fought with every fiber of her being. He was her enemy, her captor, the reason for her family's pain. To feel anything for him but hatred was a betrayal of her pack, of her very self. And yet, she could not deny the pull. It was in the way his low voice seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. It was in the intensity of his violet gaze when he listened to her, as if she were the only person in his ageless world. It was in the moments when a rare, fleeting smile would touch his lips, a startlingly beautiful expression that transformed his severe face. She would watch him when she thought he wasn't looking, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the elegant curve of his throat. Her wolf, the primal, instinctual part of her, was confused. The frost poison had finally burned away, leaving her connection to her wolf restored, but it recognized him as both predator and powerful alpha. There was a part of her, a deep, traitorous part, that was drawn to that strength. She hated herself for it. She would lie awake at night, the sheets cold around her, and curse her own weakness. This wasn't real. It was a sickness of captivity, a twisted response to his unexpected kindness. Stockholm Syndrome. She knew the term. Her mind clung to it like a shield. It was a pathology, not a feeling. One evening he brought a book with him. It was a heavy, leather-bound tome. He placed it on the table between them. "This is one of our histories," he said. "It details the Treaty of the Sunken Valley, signed 2 millennia ago between my ancestor, King Theron, and your ancestor, Alpha Lyra." Celine stared at the book as if it were a snake. "There was no treaty. You stole that land." "Read it," he urged gently. "The original document is preserved in our archives. This is a transcription. It bears both their marks." He opened the book. On the first page were 2 intricate symbols, one a stylized bat with outstretched wings, the other a howling wolf silhouetted against a full moon. Beneath them, written in an elegant, archaic script, were the terms. She read, her eyes flying across the page. The treaty was clear. The valley was ceded to the vampires in perpetuity, a sanctuary for their great slumber. In exchange, the vampires swore to protect the wolf territories to the north from the incursions of the mountain trolls, and to share the bounty of the valley's rare medicinal herbs. Beneath the terms were the names of witnesses. Her breath caught. She recognized them. Kale the Wise, Mira Silverpaw, both legendary figures from the old stories, heroes who had lived in the time of Alpha Lyra. They would never have been party to a lie. "This is a forgery," she whispered, her voice shaking. Her entire life, her people's entire war, was predicated on the belief that the valley had been stolen. "It is not," Adrian said softly. "Look at the date. Look at the names of the witnesses. Your own histories must mention them. I know they do because my scholars have studied your oral traditions, as much as you have allowed us access to them." He pointed to the list. "I have sent copies of this treaty to your father for 50 years. He burns them. He claims we have mastered the art of forgery, that we have learned your ancient scripts to deceive you. When I offered to allow his historians to examine the original under whatever conditions he wished, in neutral territory with mediators from the human kingdoms, he refused. He said it was a trap to murder his scholars." "Why?" she asked, looking up at him, her mind reeling. "Why would my people forget this? Why would they fight a war over a lie?" Adrian's face was grim. "History is written by the victors, but it is also reshaped by the desperate. 200 years ago, a great plague swept through the wolflands. The herbs that could have cured it grew only in the valley. Your alpha at the time, Ulrich the Red, demanded access. My predecessor, King Mordain, was a hard and fearful man. He refused, citing the sanctity of the treaty and the nearing of the slumber. He feared that if he allowed the wolves into the valley during our most vulnerable time, they would slaughter us in our sleep. Ulrich, in his grief and rage, watched his people die by the thousands. Most of your eldest shamans, your memory keepers who held the oral traditions, perished in that plague. The few who remembered the treaty and tried to remind Ulrich were cast out as traitors, accused of defending vampires while their people suffered. In his desperation and fury, Ulrich declared the treaty a fabrication, a vampire lie to justify theft. He declared the valley stolen wolfland and attacked. He was defeated, and the story of the stolen land became a rallying cry for his people, a way to turn their unbearable grief into righteous anger. The truth was buried beneath a century of bloodshed. Your father inherited this lie from his father, who inherited it from Ulrich's line. Whether he knows it is a lie or truly believes it, I cannot say. Celine felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The war, the hatred, the deaths of so many on both sides, all of it was based on a lie. A lie her own people had told themselves, born from a plague that killed the very elders who could have preserved the truth. She looked at Adrian, at the sorrow in his eyes, and saw not an enemy, but the inheritor of a tragic, tangled history, just as she was. He wasn't a monster who had stolen her home. He was a king trying to protect his people from a war built on grief and false memory, bound by the same chains of duty and history that she was. The revelation was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The lines between captor and captive, between enemy and ally, between monster and man, blurred into an incomprehensible, terrifying gray. In that moment, the careful walls she had built around her heart didn't just crack, they crumbled into dust. The truth of the treaty settled not like a gentle rain, but like a landslide, reshaping the entire landscape of her world. Every grievance, every battle cry, every drop of blood spilled by her people in the name of reclaiming their ancestral land was cast in a new, sickening light. It was a war built on a foundation of grief and pride, a lie passed down through generations until it had hardened into gospel. Her father, the Alpha King, was not a righteous leader fighting to reclaim what was stolen. He was perpetuating a lie that had cost countless lives. Whether he knew the truth and denied it or truly believed the false history, she could not yet say, but the knowledge was a bitter poison either way. She finally ventured out of her room. Her first steps into the corridor felt momentous, a crossing of a boundary both physical and psychological. She expected the castle to feel alien and threatening, but instead it was just quiet. The stone halls were lined with tapestries depicting scenes from vampire history, coronations, great discoveries, celestial events. It was a silent testament to a culture far older and more complex than she had ever imagined. She wandered for hours, unchallenged, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. She found a library that seemed to stretch for miles, its shelves groaning under the weight of countless books. She found an observatory at the top of the highest spire, a magnificent contraption of brass and glass pointed at the eternal night sky. She found courtyards open to the stars, filled with strange, pale flowers that bloomed only in moonlight and smelled of spice and snow. This was not the dead, soulless place of her imagination. It was ancient and sad and beautiful. Her relationship with Adrian deepened in the wake of the revelation. The pretense of captor and captive fell away, replaced by an uneasy, unacknowledged partnership. They spent their evenings in the library, the scent of old paper and leather surrounding them. He showed her the original treaty, its parchment brittle with age, the marks of their ancestors still clear and true. Seeing it with her own eyes cemented the horrifying truth. He pulled out maps, star charts, historical records, sharing his world with her, not as a king showing off his treasures, but as a scholar sharing his passion. In this new proximity, the attraction she had fought so hard against became an undeniable roaring fire. She could no longer blame it on captivity or the frost poison's lingering effects. This was real. It was in the way her breath caught when he stood too close, the air around him always so cool. It was in the way her skin tingled where his gaze rested. It was in the desperate, insane urge she felt to reach out and touch him, to see if his skin was as cold and smooth as marble, to feel if a heart, however slow, beat beneath his chest. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils would dilate when she looked at him, in the careful, rigid control he exerted over his own movements, as if he were afraid to make a sudden move and frighten her away. A chasm of unspoken feeling lay between them, terrifying and thrilling. Neither of them dared to cross it. The circumstances of their meeting, the kidnapping, the war, the centuries of hatred, were a shadow that touched everything. How could anything pure grow from such poisoned soil? One night, they stood in the observatory, the sky a breathtaking sweep of diamond dust. A full moon, her moon, bathed the mountaintops in silver light. It should have made her feel homesick, a painful reminder of her pack running free below. Instead, looking at it with Adrian by her side, it just felt beautiful. "It's the first full moon I've seen from here," she said, her voice soft. "At home we would be running tonight, the whole pack. There's no feeling like it. Pure freedom." He was quiet for a long time, standing beside her, his gaze on the moon. "I have never known a moment of pure freedom in my life," he said, his voice low and laced with a profound melancholy. "From the moment I was turned, I was a prince. From my 5th century, I have been a king. Every action, every word, every choice has been weighed against the needs of my people, against the preservation of our history. There is no freedom in that, only duty, an endless, crushing weight." It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said to her. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful vampire king. He was just a man, impossibly old and impossibly weary, trapped in a cage of his own making. Her heart ached for him. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand on his arm. His entire body went rigid at her touch. The fabric of his coat was cool, but beneath it, she felt a tremor run through him. It was the first time she had willingly touched him. He slowly turned his head to look at her, his violet eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else. Something raw and vulnerable that stole her breath. The space between them crackled with energy. The silence stretched, filled with the thundering of her own heart. He looked from her eyes to her lips, and she knew. She knew he was going to kiss her. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she wanted him to. The moment was shattered by a sudden, jarring noise from far below, the sound of an alarm bell, a deep, resonant clang that echoed up through the stone of the castle. Adrian stiffened, the vulnerability in his eyes instantly replaced by the sharp, focused attention of a king. "What is that?" Celine whispered. Another sound followed, a sound she knew in her bones, a sound that was both a comfort and a terror. The collective howl of a wolf pack. A war cry. "My pack," she breathed, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. "They've come for me." Adrian's gaze met hers, and in his eyes she saw the same dawning horror she felt. The fragile peace they had built in their tower was about to be obliterated. Her rescuers had arrived, and they had just declared war. The castle, once so silent, erupted into a cacophony of organized chaos. The alarm bell continued its frantic tolling while the distant howls of her pack grew closer, a rising chorus of fury and determination. Adrian moved with a speed that was breathtaking. One moment he was beside her in the observatory, the next he was striding towards the door, every line of his body radiating command. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice sharp with an urgency she had never heard before. "You will be safest in this tower." "They are my family, Adrian," she said, her voice trembling. "They won't hurt me." He turned back to her, his face a grim mask in the moonlight. "They will see you in a vampire's castle and assume the worst. My guards will see a pack of shifters storming the gates and do what they are trained to do. The frost touch is too slow and draining for melee combat. They will use blades. They will kill each other, Celine. All of them." The thought was a physical blow. Her pack, her family, fighting his guards, his people. Both sides, driven by loyalty and love, about to slaughter each other over a misunderstanding. Over her. "I have to stop them," she said, moving towards him. "No," he commanded, stepping in front of the door, blocking her path. "It's too dangerous. You would be caught in the middle." "It's my fault they're here," she cried, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. "I can talk to them. I can explain." "There will be no time for explanations," he said, his voice grim. "Only violence." He looked at her, and the king's mask slipped for a moment, revealing the man beneath, a man terrified of what was about to happen. "Please, Celine, stay here. Let me handle this. I will try to minimize the bloodshed." Before he could argue further, he was gone, a blur of shadow moving down the spiral staircase, his name being called by armored guards in the halls below. Celine was left alone in the observatory, the sounds of battle now clearly audible, the clash of steel, the enraged snarls of wolves, the guttural cries of vampires. She knew what had taken her pack so long. The Black Citadel was built on ley lines, and its ancient wards were legendary. They would have had to find a way to break through magical barriers that had stood for millennia, to wait for a weakness in the enchantments, or find someone powerful enough to breach them. It would have taken weeks of desperate preparation. She paced the circular room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. He had told her to stay, to be safe, but safety felt like cowardice. Her people were fighting for her. Her brother Cale would be leading them. He was brave and headstrong and would throw himself into the heart of the danger without a second thought. And Adrian, he would be down there too, trying to protect his home, his people, trying to take them alive as he had ordered. The two most important men in her life were on a collision course, and she was trapped in a tower like a helpless damsel from a story. But she was not helpless. She was a princess of the Silvermoon Pack. She made her choice. She raced down the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone. The castle was a maze, but her heightened senses guided her towards the sounds of the fight. She emerged into the main courtyard, and the scene before her was a vision from a nightmare. Her pack, in their massive wolf forms, were a whirlwind of silver and gray fur, teeth, and claws. They fought with the desperate ferocity of a people trying to rescue their own. They were magnificent and terrifying. And they were fighting a losing battle. The vampire guards were fewer in number, but they were impossibly fast and strong. They moved like wraiths, their swords flashing in the moonlight, cutting down wolves with disciplined, deadly efficiency. Blood, both the bright crimson of her people and the darker, thicker blood of the vampires, stained the flagstones. The air was thick with the scent of it, a coppery tang that made her stomach churn. She saw Cale, his fur the color of winter snow, larger than the others, battling two guards at once. He was magnificent, but he was tiring. A third guard was flanking him, sword raised for a killing blow. "Cale!" she screamed, her voice lost in the din. Then she saw Adrian. He was in the center of the fray, not fighting with the brutal efficiency of his guards, but commanding. "Hold!" he roared, his voice imbued with a power that cut through the chaos. "Take them alive, no killing. Use the flat of your blades, disarm them." He was trying to de-escalate, to save her people even as they attacked his home. He parried a clumsy lunge from a young wolf, his movements economical and precise, disarming the shifter without harming him, sending him tumbling away with nothing but bruises. It was then that Cale saw him. With a roar of pure hatred, he broke away from the guards and launched himself at Adrian. He saw only the Vampire King, the monster who had stolen his sister, the enemy who had to die. Adrian turned, his eyes widening as the massive white wolf hurtled towards him. He raised his arms to defend himself, but he was off balance, still recovering from the parry. Cale would crush him. "No!" The scream was ripped from Celine's soul. She ran, heedless of the danger, of the swords and claws flashing around her. Time seemed to slow. She saw the trajectory of her brother's attack, the resignation in Adrian's eyes as he prepared to take the blow rather than kill her brother. She would not let this happen. She would not let her two worlds destroy each other. She threw herself between them. She reached them an instant before Cale did, turning to face her brother, her arms spread wide to shield Adrian. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. Cale, airborne, tried to twist away, his eyes wide with shock and confusion at seeing her not captive but defending her captor. He couldn't halt his momentum entirely. He crashed into her, his massive body sending them both tumbling to the hard stone. The impact was jarring, knocking the wind out of her, but she was alive. She had stopped him. A stunned silence fell over the courtyard. The fighting faltered as both sides stared at the impossible scene. The wolf princess, alive and unharmed, shielding the vampire king from her own brother. Cale shifted back into his human form, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Celine? What are you doing? Get away from him!" Celine pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the scrapes on her arms and the ache in her ribs. Adrian was beside her in an instant, his hand hovering near her back, not touching, but ready to support her. She stood firm and looked at her brother, at the faces of her pack, who were now shifting back to human, their expressions a mixture of relief, confusion, and betrayal. "I am not his prisoner," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the sudden silence of the courtyard. "I am here by choice." Cale stared at her, then at Adrian, his eyes burning with betrayal. "Choice? He stole you, Celine. We've been breaking through blood wards and ancient enchantments for 3 weeks trying to reach you. He is a monster." "No," she said, and she looked from her brother's beloved, furious face to Adrian's pale, astonished one. She had made a choice in that split second, a choice that would change the course of their history forever. He is not the monster we were taught to believe. The stories were wrong. She took a deep breath, knowing the weight of her next words. She stood her ground, a bridge between two worlds, and met her brother's gaze without flinching. "The war is built on a lie. There was a treaty, Cale. Our own ancestors ceded the valley to them. I have seen it. I have verified it. Everything we have been fighting for is false." She gestured to the castle behind her. "And I'm staying, not as a prisoner, but to build peace. Come inside. Let me show you the truth." The aftermath of the failed rescue was a fragile, tense truce. Celine's pack, at her insistence and Cale's reluctant command, were not imprisoned, but given quarters in a separate wing of the castle. The vampires provided them with medical care for their wounds, a gesture that was met with deep suspicion but grudging acceptance. They were treated as guests, though armed guards stood at a respectful distance. The courtyard had been cleansed of blood, but the memory of the violence lingered in the air like a ghost. Celine found herself in the most difficult position of her life, caught between the family she loved and the man she was coming to love. The first conversation with her brother was agonizing. They met in the castle library, the silent, watching books a stark contrast to the emotional storm between them. Cale paced the floor, his movements agitated, his face etched with betrayal. "I don't understand, Celine," he said, his voice raw. "He kidnapped you. We spent 3 weeks breaking through his wards, nearly losing our lives. We came to save you, and you defended him. You chose him over your own blood." "It's not that simple, Cale," she pleaded, gesturing to the heavy tome detailing the treaty that still lay on the table. "Everything we've been fighting for, the story of the sunken valley, it was a lie." She explained what she had learned, showing him the ancient text, the marks of their ancestors, the names of legendary witnesses he would recognize from their oldest stories. She explained about the plague, about Ulrich the Red's grief-born rage, about how the truth had been buried under generations of loss. She watched his face as he read, saw his righteous anger slowly curdle into confusion, and then into a dawning, horrified understanding. "Our war," she finished softly, her voice thick with emotion, "has been meaningless. All those deaths, all that hatred, for a lie born of desperation 200 years ago." Cale sank into a chair, his head in his hands. His broad shoulders shook. "Father," he whispered, "does he know?" "I don't know," Celine admitted, kneeling beside him and taking his hand. "Perhaps the lie is so old he believes it to be true. Or perhaps," she hesitated, the words painful to speak. "Perhaps he knows and thinks the truth no longer matters. The valley is rich, strategic. Without the war, we would have no claim to it. But it does matter, Kale. We can't keep sending our people to die for a lie. We can't keep hating them for something they didn't do." Kale looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed and furious and full of anguish. "And him? The king? What is he to you?" She hesitated, her heart hammering. "He is not what I expected. He is trying to protect his people, just as father is. He is burdened by the same duty, the same history. He has shown me kindness when he could have shown cruelty. He has shown me truth when he could have shown lies. And she swallowed hard. I believe him. I believe in the possibility of peace, and I believe I can help build it." Kale stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the moment he understood what she wasn't saying. Saw the shock and disgust and reluctant acceptance war across his face. "You care for him," he said, his voice flat. "You care for the vampire who took you." "Yes," she said simply. There was no point in lying, not to Kale, who knew her better than anyone. "I do." He stood abruptly, turning away from her. For a moment she thought he would storm out, would reject her and the truth she had shown him. But he stopped at the door, his hand on the frame, his head bowed. "Show me," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Show me this vampire king of yours. Let me see for myself if he is worthy of what you're offering. Because if he is not, sister, treaty or no treaty, I will tear his throat out with my own teeth." This was the opening she needed. Over the next few days, with Adrian's full support, she began the painstaking work of building a bridge. She arranged a meeting between Adrian and Kale. It was held in a neutral room, with no guards present except those standing outside the door. It was stiff and fraught with tension. Kale's hatred for the king who had taken his sister warred with the undeniable truth of the treaty laid out before him. Every question was an accusation, every answer scrutinized for deception. Adrian, for his part, was patient and respectful. He didn't gloat or demand apologies. He didn't hide behind the diplomatic language of kings. He spoke plainly, showing Kale historical records and maps, answering his angry questions with calm, reasoned answers. He spoke of his desire for peace, not as a conqueror demanding surrender, but as a leader desperate to end the centuries of pointless bloodshed that had cost both their peoples so much. "I know what I did was wrong," Adrian said, looking Kale directly in the eye. "Taking your sister was an act of desperation, and it was a violation of everything she deserved. I will carry that shame for the rest of my very long life. But I also know that without her, we would still be killing each other over a lie. She has been the bridge between our peoples. She has been the one to see past the hatred and find the truth. I did not deserve her understanding, but she gave it anyway. And now I am asking you, not as a king to a prince, but as one brother to another, to help me build a peace that honors the sacrifices both our peoples have made." Slowly, painstakingly, over days of tense negotiation and late-night conversations, Kale began to see Adrian not as a monster, but as a king, much like their own father, burdened with the protection of his people. The real enemies, they all began to realize, were the old lies, the inherited hatreds, the pride that prevented either side from seeking the truth. Celine acted as the translator, not of language, but of culture and intent. She explained the deep significance of pack loyalty to Adrian, the sacred bond between Alpha and pack members that went beyond law or logic. It was family. It was soul deep. She articulated the vampire's need for security and historical preservation to Kale. their long memories that made them cautious, their cultural trauma from past betrayals that made trust so difficult to give. She was the keystone holding the fragile arch of their nascent peace together. Her relationship with Adrian transformed in the crucible of these negotiations. The unspoken attraction between them was now an open secret, visible in the way he deferred to her in meetings, the way his eyes would find hers across a crowded room, seeking her approval or support, the way she would instinctively move to stand by his side when tensions rose. They were a team, a united front. They balanced each other, her warmth and passion tempering his cool logic, his patience and historical perspective grounding her impulsiveness. One evening, after a particularly difficult session with the wolf elders who had accompanied Kale, they found themselves alone in the observatory again. The tension of the day had left them both exhausted. The elders had been harsh, their questions bordering on accusations, their skepticism a thick wall. But Celine had held firm, her defense of the treaty and of Adrian's intentions passionate and unwavering. "You were brilliant today," Adrian said, his voice soft. He stood closer to her than he ever had before, close enough that she could feel the cool aura that surrounded him, a contrast to the heat of her own skin. "You convinced Elder Maeve to consider the terms. My own counsel has tried and failed to reason with her for 50 years. She just needed to hear it from one of her own," Celine said, a weary smile on her face. "She needed to see that you weren't the devil from her grandmother's stories. That you were just a man trying to do what was right for his people." "No," he corrected her gently, and his hand rose, hesitated for a moment in the air between them, and then, finally, completed its journey. He gently cupped her cheek, his touch cool but not cold, sending a shiver of pure electricity through her. She needed to see you. To see that a daughter of the moon could stand in this castle and speak of peace without losing herself. To see that you believed in me. You are the only reason any of this is possible, Celine. Without you, we would all still be trapped in our old hatreds, killing each other until there was nothing left but ash and regret." "Celine," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. It was raw, vulnerable, and utterly sincere. "What you did in the courtyard, you saved me. You saved us all. You threw yourself in front of a charging werewolf to protect me. You chose me over the easy path, over your own safety. I couldn't let him hurt you," she confessed, her voice barely audible. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "I couldn't let anyone hurt you. The thought of losing you, it terrified me more than anything." His thumb stroked her cheekbone, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. His violet eyes searched hers with an intensity that felt like he was looking into her very soul. The chasm of unspoken feeling that had separated them for so long was finally gone. There was nothing between them now but the truth. "The moment I saw you in the forest," he murmured, his voice low and aching, "furious and defiant and so blindingly alive, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Not in seeking leverage, but in choosing you. Because in that instant, even as I gave the order to take you, you ceased to be a pawn in my game and became the only thing that mattered. I told myself it was strategy, that I had chosen you because you argued for peace, because you were your father's favorite. But the truth is simpler and more damning. I chose you because from the moment I saw you, I could not look away." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his cool breath mingling with her warm exhalations. "I have lived for 3,000 years, Celine. I have seen wonders and terrors that would break a mortal mind. I have loved before, in my youth, before I understood the burden of eternity. But I have never felt anything like what I feel for you. It is terrifying. It consumes me. And it is the only thing that has ever made me feel truly alive in all my long existence. I love you. I love your fire, your compassion, your refusal to accept easy lies. I love the way you see the world, with such hope and passion. You have brought light into my darkness." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over to trail down her cheeks. "I hated you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I tried so hard to hate you. I told myself it was wrong, that I was betraying my pack, that I was sick." "I know," he said, his voice aching with regret. His own eyes shimmered with emotion. "And I deserved it. I still do. Nothing can erase how we began. Nothing can change the fact that I took you against your will, that I caused you and your family pain. But I swear to you, Celine, if you give me the chance, I will spend the rest of my very long life making it right. I will spend every day earning the trust you have given me. I will be worthy of you, or I will die trying." She closed the small distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not born of passion or lust, but of a profound, soul-deep recognition. It was a sealing of a pact, a promise of a shared future, an acknowledgement of a love that had grown in the most impossible of circumstances. His lips were cool, but the kiss itself was full of a warmth that spread through her entire body, chasing away the last shadows of doubt and fear. It was tender and fierce all at once, a collision of ice and fire that somehow created something entirely new. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, foreheads pressed together, her hands fisted in the fabric of his shirt, his fingers tangled in her hair. They were no longer king and princess, vampire and wolf, captor and captive. They were Adrian and Celine, and together they were going to bring peace to their worlds, or burn trying. The path to a lasting peace was paved with the hard stones of mistrust and ancient prejudice, and every step forward felt like a battle. With Kale now a convinced, if reluctant, ally, and the wolf elders slowly coming to accept the undeniable truth of the treaty, they returned to the Silver Moon Pack's territory. It was the first time Celine had been home since her abduction, and the welcome was a tumultuous mix of joy and deep suspicion. To see her return not as a rescued captive, broken and traumatized, but as an emissary for the vampires, with the vampire king himself escorted by her side, and her own brother's approval, was a shock that rippled through her people like an earthquake. Her father, the Alpha King Theron, was a formidable man, his silver-streaked hair and proud bearing a mirror of the unyielding mountains his people called home. He greeted his daughter with a fierce, relieved embrace that lifted her off her feet. But his eyes, when they fell upon Adrian, standing a respectful distance away, were chips of ice. The royal council was a tense and hostile affair, held in the great cavern that served as their council chamber, lit by roaring fires and filled with the scent of pine smoke and earth. Adrian stood before the wolf elders and the Alpha King, a lone figure of stillness and shadow in the warm, firelit space, and bore their accusations and insults with an unreadable calm. It was Celine who spoke first, her voice ringing with passion and conviction. She told them the truth of the treaty, presenting the text Adrian had carefully transcribed, each word and mark verified against the original. She spoke of the lies that had fueled their war, of the plague that had killed their memory keepers, of Ulrich the Red's grief-born rage that had rewritten their history. She spoke of the honor she had witnessed in the Vampire King, of his willingness to negotiate, of his patience in the face of her father's repeated rejections. She spoke of the chance for a future where their children would not have to die for the mistakes of the past. "We have hated them for centuries," she concluded, her gaze sweeping over the skeptical, angry faces of the elders, meeting each one without flinching. "But we were hating a ghost, a story. It is time we see the people before us and build a future based on truth, not on tragic old lies. It is time we honor the sacrifice of those who died in the plague by not letting their memory be used to justify more death. Her words, combined with Cale's solemn support and his own account of seeing the original treaty and the vampire archives, began to sow seeds of doubt among the council. But it was her father's reaction that would determine everything. Alpha King Theron stood, the firelight casting deep shadows on his weathered face. He walked to the table where the transcribed treaty lay and stared at it for a long moment. The entire council held its breath. Then, with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he touched the ancient marks. "I have seen this before," he admitted, his voice hollow and heavy with a weariness that seemed to age him before their eyes. "My father showed it to me when I became Alpha, on the day of my coronation. He told me it was vampire propaganda, a forgery meant to make us doubt our cause. He told me that Ulrich the Red had exposed it as a lie, and that to believe it was to betray our people. His voice broke, and he closed his eyes. I wanted to believe him. The valley is rich, strategic, vital. Our claim to it gave us strength, gave us a cause that united the packs. I told myself the document was too convenient, too perfect. I convinced myself it had to be false. And I told that to my children, to my council, to my people, until I almost believed it myself." He opened his eyes and looked at Adrian, and the two kings faced each other across the firelit space. "But I knew," Theron said, his voice gaining strength even as it filled with shame. "In my heart, I knew. I have led my people to die for a lie. I have perpetuated a war that should have ended generations ago. I am not proud of what I've done." The silence in the council chamber was absolute. Celine felt tears streaming down her face. Her father, the man she had idolized her entire life, was not the righteous hero she had believed him to be. He was flawed, driven by pride and pragmatism to deny a truth that would have cost him power and purpose. But he was also capable of admitting his fault, and in that moment, she loved him more deeply than ever before. Adrian stepped forward, and every vampire guard's hand went to their weapons, but he simply bowed deeply, a gesture of respect from one king to another. "What you have done took more courage than any battle," Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "To admit fault in front of your people, to choose truth over pride, is the act of a true leader. My people and yours have both been prisoners of this lie. Let us free them together." Theron stared at him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "For our children," he said simply. Adrian took it. The handshake between the two kings was witnessed by every elder, every guard, every member of both peoples present. It was a beginning. The negotiations that followed were long and arduous, stretching over weeks. Days turned into heated debates and careful compromises. Adrian, showing a humility that stunned the wolves, admitted his own people's faults, their historical arrogance, their failure to communicate clearly about the herbs that could have saved lives during the plague. He apologized for King Mordane's cruelty in refusing aid, for the rigid adherence to treaty terms when compassion should have prevailed. He proposed a new treaty, one that went far beyond the original. He offered not just peace, but a true alliance. He offered shared access to the valley's resources, with clear guidelines that protected both the vampires' hibernation sites and the wolves' need for the medicinal herbs. He proposed joint protection of their borders, with mixed patrols to defend against outside threats. He advocated for the establishment of a permanent council, with equal members from both species, to resolve future disputes, to prevent misunderstandings from ever again escalating into war. His most radical proposal, however, was personal. It was made not in the council cave, but one evening as he and Celine walked by the river that marked the edge of her pack's territory. The air was warm, filled with the living sounds of the forest she loved, sounds that had once seemed so distant and unreachable in his stone castle. The sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and for the first time in weeks, they were alone, free from the weight of negotiations and watching eyes. "This peace will be fragile," he said, his eyes on the reflection of the fading light in the water. "A treaty is only parchment. It needs something more. It needs a symbol. Something living, something to bind our people together in a way that law cannot." Selene looked at him, her heart beginning to beat faster. She knew what he was going to say. The thought had been circling in her own mind for days, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "What kind of symbol?" she asked softly, though she already knew. He stopped and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. His were cool, hers were warm. The contrast felt right, like two halves of a whole, like ice and fire creating something new. "A marriage," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, despite the fear she could see lurking in their violet depths. "Our marriage. A union of the House of Night and the Silver Moon Pack. A king and a princess. A vampire and a wolf. A symbol that our peoples can build a future together, that the old hatreds can be overcome, that love is stronger than history." He drew a breath, and his voice became softer, more personal. "Selene, I love you. I love you more than my own long life, more than my kingdom, more than the honor of my house. I know the wrongness of how we began will forever be a part of our story, and I will never ask you to forget it or pretend it didn't happen. I can only ask if you can find it in your heart to build a new story with me, one that begins now, one that we write together. Will you be my wife? My queen? My partner in all things, for as long as you will have me?" Her answer was not in words, but in the joyous, tearful kiss she gave him under the light of the wolf moon that was rising over the trees. The beginning had been a crime, an act of war, a violation. But what they had built since, the trust, the understanding, the respect, the love, was real and true and powerful. It was a foundation strong enough to build a new world upon. When she finally pulled back, her face wet with tears and glowing with happiness, she whispered, "Yes. Yes to all of it. I will marry you, Adrian. I will stand beside you. I will be your queen and your partner, and together we will make sure our peoples never forget the cost of lies and the value of truth." Their engagement was the final key that unlocked the door to lasting peace. The symbolism of their union was too powerful for even the most stubborn hardliners to ignore. A wedding between a wolf princess and the vampire king was an unprecedented event, a seismic shift in the history of their world that echoed through every pack and every vampire house. The preparations themselves became an act of diplomacy. Traditions from both cultures had to be woven together, a delicate dance of compromise and respect. Vampire elders consulted with wolf shamans on ritual and meaning. The severe, Gothic aesthetics of his people met the wild, natural artistry of hers, and the result was something entirely new, something that belonged to both and neither. Selene's wedding dress was a masterpiece of this new unity, sewn from silks as pale as moonlight by vampire seamstresses, but embroidered with the silver thread of her pack's banners by wolf artisans, depicting howling wolves and ancient trees intertwined with night-blooming flowers and constellations. Adrian, for his part, eschewed the traditional black armor of his ancestors for a tunic of deep violet, the color of his eyes, embroidered with the constellation that had been in the sky on the night they met, worked in thread that shimmered like starlight. Their union was to be an equal partnership, and every detail was designed to reflect that. He was not a captor claiming his prize. She was not a prize to be claimed. They were two rulers joining their peoples, two souls joining their fates. The day of the wedding arrived, a crisp autumn afternoon when the leaves of the forest were the color of fire and gold, when the air was sharp and clean and full of promise. The ceremony was held in a neutral territory, a clearing in the foothills between the mountains and the forest, a place that belonged to neither of them, and thus to both. It had been prepared with meticulous care, decorated with garlands of pine and night-blooming jasmine, with torches and moonstone lanterns, with the symbols of both their peoples displayed side by side in harmony. Her father walked her down an aisle lined with both vampires in their silent, elegant finery and wolves in their proud, earthy leathers and furs. Every face she passed was familiar, pack members she had known since childhood, standing beside vampires she had come to know during the negotiations. All of them gathered to witness this impossible moment. Theron placed her hand in Adrian's, and the look that passed between the two kings was one of grudging respect and shared hope. A silent acknowledgement of the powerful love that had brought them all to this moment, that had forced them to confront their lies and choose a better path. They stood before a wolf elder and a vampire high priestess, who jointly presided over the ceremony, their voices blending in ancient words of blessing and binding. They exchanged vows not only to each other, but to each other's people, swearing to protect and honor them as their own, to be a bridge and not a barrier, to choose truth over comfort and peace over pride. When Adrian slid a ring of pale, moon-blessed silver onto her finger, and she placed a ring of dark, earth-forged iron onto his, a collective gasp went through the crowd. The symbols were perfect and profound. Moon and earth, night and forest, vampire and wolf, ice and fire, united. When he kissed her, it was not the desperate, searching kiss of the observatory, not the tentative first kiss of the library. It was a kiss of profound and certain joy, a public declaration of a love that had, against all odds, against all reason, remade their world. The cheers that went up were hesitant at first, wolves and vampires both uncertain of how to react. But then they grew stronger, building into a roar of approval and hope as they looked at each other, not as ancient enemies, but as allies, united by the couple before them. That night, as king and queen, they stood on the balcony of the Black Citadel, no longer her prison, but their home, a place that would now serve as a symbol of their joined kingdoms. The castle was alive with light and music and laughter, a celebration of a kind its ancient stones had never known. Below, in the courtyard where they had once been prepared to kill each other, where blood had been spilled in fear and misunderstanding, her pack and his people mingled, sharing wine and stories, dancing to music that blended the wild drums of the wolves with the elegant strings of the vampires, the laughter echoing up into the night sky like a prayer answered. It was not a perfect peace. There were still old hatreds to overcome, still wounds that would take generations to heal. There were those on both sides who would never fully accept the alliance, who clung to their old stories and old griefs. But it was a beginning, a foundation, and it was real. Adrian came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his ancient heart against her back, a rhythm she had come to love, a reminder that he was not the lifeless creature of legend, but something far more complex and beautiful. "Are you happy?" he murmured into her hair, his cool breath against her ear sending a pleasant shiver through her. Celine leaned back into her, his embrace, feeling safe and whole and more herself than she had ever been. She looked out over the lands that were now theirs to protect, a kingdom of mountains and forests, of night and moon, of old magic and new hope. Below, she could see her brother Cale laughing with one of Adrian's generals, their earlier animosity replaced by a tentative friendship. She could see her father standing with the vampire elders, discussing something with animated gestures, his face no longer hard with hatred, but open with possibility. Happier than I ever thought possible, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I was so lost when you took me. I thought my life was over, that I would die in that tower, that I would never see my family again or feel the earth under my paws. I hated you with everything I had. And now, she turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face, tracing the sharp lines she had come to know so well. Now, I cannot imagine my life without you. You are my home, Adrian. You and this impossible peace we've built together. He smiled, a rare, brilliant expression that transformed his face, and kissed her softly. Our story began with an act of violence, he said softly, echoing her own thoughts. With a king's desperate gambit and a princess's righteous fury. It was a beginning steeped in darkness and wrongdoing. But love, true love, is not about perfect beginnings. It is about the choices made along the way. The choice to listen, the choice to understand, the choice to forgive, the choice to stay and fight for something better. He pulled her closer and she melted into him, ice and fire in perfect balance. Ours is a love that did not ignore the darkness, but walked through it, together, hand in hand, and emerged into the light, stronger and truer than any fairy tale. It is a love that earned its happy ending. And as they stood there, two unlikely lovers who had become the hope of two peoples, under the light of moon and stars, Celine knew he was right. They had not been given a perfect love story. They had created one, forged it in fire and ice, built it on truth and trust.